What if I told you there are flowers that can bloom for months without asking much from you at all? Most gardens explode with color for 2 or 3 weeks, and then that magic quietly fades away. But scattered through cottage gardens, roadside plantings, and quiet backyard beds, there is a select group of perennials that simply keep going. They shrug off summer heat, they forgive a missed watering, and they keep producing flower after flower long after everything else has already called it quits for the season. Today, we are counting down 15 perennials that bloom for months without stopping. And by the time we reach the end, you will know exactly which ones deserve a place in your own garden. Stick around, because the very last plant on this list is considered one of the longest blooming perennials in the entire world. Long-blooming perennials are not just pretty faces. They are some of the most practical plants you can put in the ground. Plant them once, and instead of replanting annuals every spring, you get flowers that return year after year, often blooming even longer once their root systems mature. That means less money spent at the garden center, fewer trips with a shovel, and a lot more time simply enjoying a garden instead of constantly rebuilding it. Long-blooming perennials also do something a lot of gardeners overlook. Because they flower for weeks or months instead of just a handful of days, they become a steady, reliable food source for bees, butterflies, and hummingbirds across the entire growing season, not just during one short burst in early summer. This is the heart of any good pollinator garden design, and it is exactly why so many low-maintenance perennial gardens lean on the same handful of hardy, dependable bloomers. Before we get into the list, let me know in the comments, which flower blooms the longest in your garden? I am always curious about what is working in different climates and zones. And if you enjoy practical, no-nonsense gardening content like this, consider liking this video and subscribing. It genuinely helps this channel keep growing, and it means we can keep bringing you deep dives like this one. All right, let us get into it, starting with a plant that is nearly impossible to kill and blooms for most of the summer. 1. Yarrow, botanically known as Achillea millefolium. Yarrow is one of those perennial flowers for full sun that almost feels like cheating. It is native to Europe, Asia, and North America, and it thrives across USDA hardiness zones 3 through 9, which covers most of the continental United States. A mature yarrow plant reaches about 2 to 3 feet tall, with feathery, fern-like foliage topped by flat clusters of tiny flowers in white, yellow, pink, or deep red, depending on the variety. In most climates, it begins blooming in early summer, and, with a little deadheading, will keep producing new flower heads clear through September. The secret to that long bloom window is simple. Yarrow does not put all its energy into one giant flush of flowers. Instead, it continuously sends up new stems. So as older blooms fade, fresh ones are already opening behind them. It wants full sun and lean, well-drained soil, and it genuinely prefers to be left alone. Rich soil and frequent watering actually work against it, causing the stems to grow soft and flop over. Once established, yarrow is remarkably drought-tolerant. Bees and butterflies are drawn to those flat flower clusters, which act like little landing pads. Historically, yarrow has a fascinating backstory too. It gets its species name, millefolium, from its 1,000 tiny leaflets, and it was carried by soldiers for centuries as a wound herb, which is where its old nickname, soldier's woundwort, comes from. The most common mistake gardeners make is planting it in rich, fertile soil, expecting bigger blooms. It backfires every time. Instead, give it a lean spot, Divide the clumps every 3 or 4 years and pair it with Russian sage or coneflower for a wildflower meadow look. Yarrow also does surprisingly well in containers, as long as drainage is excellent. The one honest drawback is that yarrow can spread more aggressively than some gardeners expect, especially in loose soil, so it is worth keeping an eye on if you want a tidy bed. But for a nearly maintenance-free splash of color that keeps bees fed all summer, it earns its spot at the very start of this list. 2. Threadleaf Coreopsis. But if you think yarrow is impressive, wait until you see what threadleaf Coreopsis can do. Coreopsis verticillata, often sold under the variety name Moonbeam or Zagreb, is native to the southeastern United States and grows happily in USDA zones 4 through 9. It stays compact, usually 1 to 2 feet tall and wide, with delicate needle-like foliage that almost looks like a soft green cloud. From early summer all the way into early fall, that cloud gets covered in small, cheerful daisy-like flowers in soft yellow or golden tones. Few flowers that bloom all summer are this reliable in poor, rocky soil where other perennials struggle. This plant blooms for so long because it flowers on new growth continuously, and because it genuinely prefers being a little neglected. Give it full sun, average to poor, well-drained soil, and minimal watering once it is established, and it rewards you with months of color. Pollinators love it too, particularly small native bees, and it is a favorite nectar stop for skipper butterflies. The most common mistake here is overfeeding it. Too much fertilizer produces lush foliage, but far fewer flowers, which is the opposite of what most gardeners want. A light shearing after the first big flush of blooms will often trigger a second wave later in the season. It looks fantastic, massed along a border, paired with Salvia or black-eyed Susan, and it also performs beautifully in containers where its airy texture softens bolder companion plants. Its only real drawback is that individual plants can be short-lived in heavier clay soils, so good drainage really is non-negotiable. 3. Shasta daisy. Botanical name, Leucanthemum X superbum. Even more surprising is how long a classic Shasta daisy can keep flowering once it settles in. Leucanthemum X superbum is a hybrid perennial, first bred by the famous horticulturist Luther Burbank, and it thrives in USDA zones 5 through 9. It grows 1 to 3 feet tall depending on the variety, forming clumps of crisp white daisy-shaped flowers with sunny yellow centers. Bloom time typically runs from early summer through late summer, and with regular deadheading, many gardeners stretch that into early fall. The flower colors are almost always classic white and yellow, though a few newer cultivars introduce soft cream tones. This is a plant that wants full sun and rich, well-drained soil, with consistent moisture during its peak growing season. Its long bloom period comes from its habit of producing multiple flowering stems per plant. So as you snip the spent blooms, new buds are already waiting to open. Bees and butterflies visit readily, and the flat, open flower shape makes it especially easy for smaller pollinators to access. One interesting bit of history. Luther Burbank spent 17 years crossing different daisy species to create the Shasta daisy we know today, naming it after the snowy peak of Mount Shasta. A common mistake is letting clumps get overcrowded, which reduces airflow and invites powdery mildew. Dividing every 2 to 3 years keeps plants vigorous and blooming heavily. Shasta daisies pair beautifully with purple salvia or blue catmint, and they do reasonably well in large containers, though they perform best in the open garden. The main drawback is that some varieties can be short-lived, lasting only 3 or 4 years before needing replacement. The next perennial completely changes the game because it does not just bloom for months, it practically blooms until frost. 4. Black-eyed Susan. Botanical name, Rudbeckia fulgida. Rudbeckia fulgida, commonly grown as the variety goldsturm, is native to the eastern and central United States and is hardy in USDA zones 3 through 9. It reaches roughly 2 to 3 feet tall, with sturdy, upright stems and bold golden-yellow petals surrounding a dark chocolate-brown center. The bloom season typically runs from midsummer all the way through October in many climates, which makes it one of the true workhorses among garden flowers. That extended bloom happens because each plant produces dozens of flower stems in succession, rather than all at once. It wants full sun, though it tolerates light afternoon shade, and it is not fussy about soil as long as drainage is decent. Once established, it handles drought reasonably well, though occasional deep watering during extreme heat keeps blooms coming strong. Bees, butterflies, and later in the season, goldfinches feeding on the seed heads all rely on this plant. Interestingly, Rudbeckia is named after Olaus Rudbeck, a Swedish botanist and mentor to Carl Linnaeus, the father of modern plant naming. A common mistake gardeners make is cutting the plant back too early in fall, before birds have had a chance to feast on the seeds. Leaving spent flower heads standing through winter supports wildlife and adds structure to the garden. Black-eyed Susan spreads readily by both seed and rhizome, so give it room and consider dividing crowded clumps every few years. It pairs wonderfully with Russian sage and ornamental grasses, and while it can grow in large containers, it truly shines planted in generous drifts. The only real drawback is that it can self-seed enthusiastically, which some gardeners consider a feature rather than a flaw. Wait until you see number 5, because this next plant might be the single easiest perennial on this entire list. 5. Catmint. Botanical name, Nepeta phasanii. Nepeta phasanii, sold widely under the variety name Walker's Low, is a hybrid catmint hardy in USDA zones 3 through 8. It forms a mounded, silvery gray clump about 18 to 24 inches tall and wide, covered in spikes of soft lavender blue flowers. What sets catmint apart is the sheer length of its bloom season. In most gardens, it starts flowering in late spring and, with one simple midsummer haircut, rebooms continuously until the first hard frost. It wants full sun and thrives in average, well-drained soil, and it is remarkably drought-tolerant once established, needing very little supplemental water. That resilience, combined with its habit of continuously sending up new flower spikes, is exactly why it blooms for so long. Bees absolutely adore catmint, and it is one of the most reliable pollinator plants you can grow, often humming audibly on a warm afternoon. It shares a family with true catnip, and while cats are sometimes drawn to it, most varieties are far less intoxicating to them than the culinary herb. The most common mistake is skipping the mid-season shearing. Cutting the whole plant back by about a third after its first flush looks drastic, but it triggers a fuller, longer-lasting second bloom. Catmint is a classic edging plant, pairs beautifully with roses and salvia, and grows well in containers too. Its one drawback is a tendency to flop open in the middle in richer soil, so lean conditions actually keep it tidier. This next flower has a secret many gardeners overlook. It can handle conditions that would wilt almost anything else on this list. 6. Blanket flower. Botanical name, Gaillardia x grandiflora. Gaillardia x grandiflora, commonly called blanket flower, is a hybrid perennial native to prairies and dry regions of North and South America, and it thrives in USDA zones 3 through 10. It grows 1 to 2 feet tall, producing daisy-like flowers in fiery combinations of red, orange, and yellow that genuinely resemble woven blankets, which is where the common name comes from. The bloom season stretches from late spring through the first frost in warmer climates, making it one of the most reliable flowers that bloom for months in hot, sunny gardens. It wants full sun and, importantly, poor to average, extremely well-drained soil. Its long bloom period comes down to heat tolerance. While many perennials slow their flowering during the hottest weeks of summer, blanket flower barely notice, continuously producing new buds through peak heat. It needs very little water once established, and in fact, overwatering is more dangerous to this plant than drought. Butterflies and native bees visit constantly, particularly during the hottest part of the day when other flowers have less to offer. The biggest mistake gardeners make is planting it in rich garden soil or heavy clay, which tends to shorten its lifespan considerably. Improving drainage with sand or gravel at planting time makes a real difference. Deadheading extends the bloom season noticeably, and dividing plants every 2 to 3 years keeps them vigorous, since blanket flower can be somewhat short-lived. It pairs naturally with yarrow and Russian sage for a drought-tolerant, low-maintenance perennial bed, and it grows well in containers with sharp drainage. Its main drawback is exactly that shorter lifespan, but its nonstop color more than makes up for it. Number 7 brought a color to the garden that almost no other perennial can match quite as intensely. 7. Salvia. Botanical name, Salvia nemorosa. Salvia nemorosa, especially the variety May Night, is native to Europe and Central Asia and grows well across USD/ASI zones 4 through 8. It reaches about 18 to 24 inches tall, sending up dense spikes of deep violet-blue flowers above tidy aromatic foliage. This salvia typically begins blooming in late spring, and with prompt deadheading, will rebloom in flushes right through early fall. Each spike that gets cut back is quickly replaced by fresh growth, which is the mechanism behind its long flowering window. It prefers full sun and well-drained soil, and once established, it handles dry spells with ease, needing supplemental water only during prolonged droughts. Bees find the tubular flowers irresistible, and hummingbirds will visit too, particularly red-flowered salvia varieties. A common mistake is neglecting to cut spent flower spikes down to the basal foliage after the first bloom. Skipping this step is the single biggest reason gardeners feel disappointed by salvia's rebloom. Done properly, though, it can flower nearly non-stop from May through September in many regions. Salvia combines beautifully with yellow Coreopsis or orange Gaillardia for striking color contrast, and it performs well in containers as long as drainage is good. Its drawback is fairly minor. Some varieties can develop woody, less productive centers after several years, which dividing or replacing every 4 to 5 years easily solves. 8. Pincushion flower. Botanical name, Scabiosa columbaria. Scabiosa columbaria, often sold as butterfly blue, is native to Europe, Asia, and parts of Africa, and it grows in USDA zones 3 through 8. It forms a low mound, about 12 to 18 inches tall, of soft lavender blue, pincushion-shaped flowers held on thin, wiry stems. This is genuinely one of the longest blooming plants for a small garden space, often flowering from late spring straight through the first frost, especially with regular deadheading. It wants full sun and neutral to slightly alkaline, well-drained soil. Heavy clay or overly acidic soil will noticeably shorten its bloom season, so amending planting sites with compost and grit pays off. Moderate, consistent watering keeps it flowering steadily, though it tolerates brief dry spells once mature. Butterflies are especially fond of scabiosa, hence the popular variety name, and bees visit regularly as well. The flower's unusual pincushion shape, with tiny protruding stamens, actually gives butterflies an easy landing platform. A frequent mistake is planting it in soil that stays too wet over winter, which can rot the crown. Raised beds or slightly sloped sites solve this easily. It looks wonderful edging a path, pairs nicely with catmint and salvia, and does very well in containers where drainage is easier to control. Its drawback is a relatively short individual lifespan of about 3 years, though it self-seeds gently enough to keep a patch going. 9. Daylily. Botanical name, Hemerocallis. Now here is a flower most people already know, but very few realize just how long it can bloom when you choose the right variety. Hemerocallis, commonly called daylily, originated in Asia and is hardy across an enormous range, USDA, zones 3 through 9. A single daylily flower opens for only 1 day, which is exactly where the name comes from. But modern reblooming varieties like Stella d'Oro produce so many buds in succession that the overall bloom season can stretch from late spring into fall. Stella d'Oro grows about 12 to 18 inches tall, with golden yellow, trumpet-shaped flowers, and is one of the most planted perennials in American gardens for exactly this reason. It thrives in full sun to light shade and adapts to nearly any well-drained soil, making it one of the most forgiving perennials for beginners. Its extended bloom comes from the sheer number of flowerscapes each clump produces, sometimes 20 or more per plant in a single season. Bees visit the open blooms regularly, and hummingbirds are drawn to red and orange-flowered varieties in particular. A common mistake is choosing older, once-blooming heirloom varieties, expecting the long season that reblooming types offer. Always check the variety before planting if long bloom time is the goal. Deadheading spent scapes keeps the clump looking tidy and can encourage additional flowering. Daylilies divide easily every 3 to 4 years, pair beautifully with salvia and coneflower, and grow surprisingly well in large containers. Their only real drawback is that individual blooms are fleeting, though the plant as a whole rarely stops producing new ones. We're entering the final stretch now, and this next perennial brings a hazy, silvery beauty that most gardens are missing entirely. 10. Russian sage. Russian sage, botanically reclassified from Perovskia atroplicifolia to Salvia yangi, is native to Central Asia and grows well in USDA zones 4 through 9. It is a larger perennial, reaching 3 to 5 feet tall, with airy silver-gray foliage and clouds of small lavender-blue flowers on tall branching stems. From midsummer through the first hard frost, this plant is rarely without flowers, making it one of the most dependable hardy perennials for late-season color, right when many other flowers are already fading. It wants full sun and lean, well-drained soil, and it is exceptionally drought-tolerant, actually performing worse in rich, moist conditions where it can flop or rot. Its long bloom season is a result of continuous branching. Each stem keeps dividing and producing new flower clusters as the season progresses. Bees are constant visitors, and the aromatic, sage-scented foliage also makes it deer and rabbit resistant, a real bonus for gardeners dealing with wildlife pressure. Despite the common name, it is not a true sage from Russia at all. It was actually named after a 19th century Russian general, and current botanists now place it firmly within the Salvia genus. The most common mistake is cutting it back too early in spring, before new growth has clearly emerged from the woody base. Waiting until you see fresh green shoots prevents accidentally removing healthy wood. Russian sage pairs beautifully with black-eyed Susan and Yarrow for a prairie-style planting. And while it can grow in very large containers, it truly needs open garden space to reach its full, billowing form. Its main drawback is simply its size. It needs room and can shade out smaller neighbors if planted too close. Number 2 on this list still lies ahead, but this next one shocked even experienced gardeners the first time they grew it. 11. Purple coneflower, botanical name, Echinacea purpurea. Echinacea purpurea, the purple coneflower, is native to the prairies and open woodlands of Central and Eastern North America, thriving in USDA zones 3 through 9. It grows 2 to 4 feet tall, with sturdy stems topped by daisy-like flowers in shades of purple, pink, or white, surrounding a distinctive, spiny, cone-shaped center. Bloom season typically runs from early summer through early fall, and coneflower is famous for how gracefully it ages. Even the spent, dried cones remain attractive and useful well into winter. It wants full sun, though it tolerates light shade, and prefers average, well-drained soil. Once established, it is genuinely drought-tolerant, needing supplemental water only in extended dry spells. Its long bloom period comes from continuous new bud production along its branching stems throughout the growing season. Few plants rival coneflower for pollinator benefits. Bees and butterflies work the flowers all summer, and in fall, goldfinches perch directly on the seed heads to feed. Native Americans used Echinacea medicinally for centuries, and it remains one of the most studied native plants in modern herbal research. The most common mistake is deadheading too aggressively in fall, which removes the seed heads birds rely on for winter food. A better approach is to deadhead through summer for continued blooming, then leave the last flush standing. Coneflower pairs wonderfully with Russian sage and black-eyed Susan, and grows well in large containers. Its only real drawback is that some newer hybrid colors are noticeably less vigorous and shorter-lived than the straight species. If you've been impressed so far, don't go anywhere. The final 3 are absolute blooming machines, and this next one brings a hazy, silvery beauty that most gardens are missing entirely. 12. Anise hyssop. Botanical name, Agastache. Agastache, commonly called anise hyssop, particularly the popular hybrid blue fortune, is native to North America and grows well in USDA zones 5 through 10. It reaches 2 to 3 feet tall, with upright spikes of small, tubular, blue-violet flowers above aromatic, licorice-scented foliage. From midsummer through the first frost, Agastache produces a steady, unbroken supply of flower spikes, making it one of the standout perennials for beginners who want reliable, low-maintenance color. It wants full sun and well-drained soil, and it handles heat and drought impressively well once established. Its extended bloom time comes from its branching growth habit. As each spike matures, side shoots continue developing new flowers beneath it. This plant is an absolute hummingbird magnet, and bees and butterflies visit constantly as well, making it one of the very best pollinator plants for a mixed border. The crushed foliage releases a sweet, anise-like fragrance, which is where the common name comes from, and it has a long history of use in traditional teas. A common mistake is planting it in heavy, wet soil, which shortens its lifespan considerably. Improving drainage at planting time solves this easily. It pairs beautifully with coneflower and Russian sage and does reasonably well in containers, though it prefers open garden beds. The main drawback is that it can self-seed generously in ideal conditions, so occasional thinning keeps it in check. We are closing in on the final two, and this next perennial moves in the breeze in a way that makes an entire garden feel alive. 13. Gaura. Gaura, botanically Oenothera lindheimeri, sometimes still labeled Gaura lindheimeri, is native to Texas and Louisiana and grows in USDA zones 5 through 9. It forms an airy, 2 to 4 foot mound of thin, wiry stems dotted with small, butterfly-shaped flowers in white or pink that seem to hover above the foliage. Gaura blooms from late spring all the way through the first frost, and it does so almost effortlessly, making it one of the most impressive flowers that bloom for months with very little gardener input. It wants full sun and prefers sandy, well-drained soil, and it is highly drought-tolerant once its deep taproot is established, actually resenting soggy conditions far more than dry ones. Its long bloom window comes from continuously elongating flower spikes. New buds keep opening at the tips throughout the season. Butterflies are drawn to those delicate, fluttering blooms, which is exactly how the plant earned its nickname, whirling butterflies. Bees visit regularly too, particularly smaller native species. A common mistake is transplanting mature Gaura. Its deep taproot makes it resent being moved, so choosing its permanent spot carefully from the start matters. It rarely needs deadheading to keep flowering, though a light trim mid-season keeps the form tidy. Gaura pairs beautifully with Salvia and Catmint, and while it can survive in large, deep containers, it performs best with room to spread its roots. Its drawback is that it can look a little sparse or leggy without companion plants to fill in around its base. We are down to the final two, and this next flower fills the garden with a fragrance almost as memorable as its color. 14. Garden Phlox. Botanical name, Phlox paniculata. Phlox paniculata, garden phlox, is native to the eastern and central United States and thrives in USDA zones 4 through 8. It grows 2 to 4 feet tall, producing large, rounded clusters of fragrant flowers in shades of pink, purple, white, and red atop sturdy, upright stems. Bloom season typically runs from midsummer through early fall, and established clumps can produce flowers continuously for 8 to 10 weeks or more, especially with consistent deadheading. It wants full sun to light afternoon shade and rich, moist, well-drained soil, making it slightly thirstier than several other plants on this list. Regular watering during dry spells keeps the blooms coming steadily and helps prevent stress-related mildew. The fragrance of garden phlox is a major draw for butterflies and moths, particularly in the evening, and hummingbirds visit frequently during the day. Garden phlox has been cultivated in American gardens since the 18th century, and it remains one of the most beloved cottage garden staples. The most common mistake is crowding plants too closely, which restricts airflow and makes them prone to powdery mildew, a well-known drawback of this species. Choosing mildew-resistant varieties and spacing plants generously solves most of the problem. Dividing clumps every 3 years keeps them vigorous. Garden phlox pairs beautifully with black-eyed Susan and coneflower, and while it can grow in very large containers, it truly prefers open garden beds with good air circulation. 15. Geranium Rozanne. And now, the plant so many of you have been waiting for. the one considered one of the longest blooming perennials in the entire world. This is not the tender, potted geranium most people picture. This is Geranium Rozanne, a true hardy perennial cranesbill, a hybrid cultivar hardy across USDA zones 4 through 8. It forms a spreading, mounding clump about 18 inches tall and up to 3 feet wide, covered in violet-blue flowers with delicate white centers. What makes Rozanne genuinely remarkable is its sheer bloom duration. In many gardens, it starts flowering in late spring and continues almost without pause until the first hard frost, often 5 to 6 months of continuous color, which is why it was named the Perennial Plant Association's Plant of the Year, and why so many gardeners consider it the benchmark for long-blooming perennials. It grows well in full sun to partial shade, and adapts to a wide range of well-drained soils, and it needs only moderate water, tolerating short dry spells once established. Its extraordinary bloom length comes from a growth habit that keeps producing new flowering stems from the crown, all season long, rather than slowing down after one big early flush like so many other perennials do. Bees find the open, saucer-shaped flowers easy to access, and this plant is considered one of the very best pollinator plants for a shaded or partially shaded border, filling a gap that many sun-loving perennials cannot cover. It is also remarkably resistant to deer and rabbits, which is a genuine relief for gardeners in wildlife-heavy areas. The most common mistake gardeners make is assuming it needs constant deadheading like other perennials, when in fact Rozanne is largely self-cleaning. Spent flowers fade quietly, and new ones simply take their place. A light shearing in midsummer can refresh the plant if it starts to look sprawling, but it is optional rather than essential. It spreads gracefully to fill garden gaps and edges, pairs beautifully with hostas, salvia, and daylilies, and performs wonderfully in containers, spilling elegantly over the edges. If there is a drawback here, it is only that the vigorous spreading habit that makes Rozanne so valuable in a border can occasionally crowd smaller, more delicate neighbors. So give it a little room to do what it does best. After everything we have covered today, it is easy to see why this one is considered the gold standard and why it earns the final spot on this list. So there you have it, 15 perennials that bloom for months without stopping. From tough, drought-proof survivors like Yarrow and Russian sage, to fragrant cottage garden classics like Phlox, all the way to Rozanne, one of the longest blooming perennials in the world. What ties every single one of these flowers together is simple. They were not chosen because they are rare or complicated to grow. They were chosen because they keep working quietly in the background, feeding pollinators, filling gaps, and rewarding you with color, month after month, while asking for very little in return. Imagine stepping outside in July, and instead of a garden that has already peaked and faded, you have one that is just getting started, still humming with bees, still catching the eye of anyone who walks by. That is the real reward of building a garden around long-blooming perennials instead of short-lived annuals. Now I would love to hear from you. Which of these 15 perennials are you planting first? Drop a comment and let me know. And if this video helped you plan your next garden bed, please consider subscribing for more deep dives just like this one. A garden built on patience and the right perennials does not just bloom for a season, it grows more generous every single year. So get your hands in the soil, plant something that will outlast the summer, and let your garden do the rest.